Hi, welcome back. I'm Stuart. I wanted to talk today about land suitability for septic systems. Septic systems are things that people know very little about, yet they have to spend a lot of money on them. And they make a lot of assumptions about what they can and can't do on a property, which is the reason I'm doing this video today. Septic systems, of course, are very important because they safely dispose of our waste in rural areas where we're not connected to city water and sewer. And so this video applies mostly to, or specifically I should say, to people that live in Indiana and Indiana regulations and the permitting process in Indiana. But it also probably, a lot of this applies to wherever you're living if you're looking into putting in a septic system. So the main point here, if you don't watch the rest of this video, just remember this. Don't make assumptions about a property, no matter how much you want the property and how wonderful it looks with the trees and the view and all that. Don't make any assumptions about that property regarding septic systems. If you do buy a property without, again, learning about septic systems or about site suitability, this is the takeaway of this video. Be sure that your purchase agreement is contingent on you being able to get permits for all the things you want to do on the site. Not only a septic system, but to build a house, to build a pool or a barn or a wedding venue or whatever you might want to be doing. Make sure that purchase agreement is contingent on you being able to do that. And that way, if you can't, then you'll have some legal action, hopefully be able to get a refund or whatever. You'll have some leverage and some footing. So the two main points are, never assume you can put a septic system on a property. I don't care if there was an existing house on it or not. Assume you can't until you know that you can. And we'll talk about that process. And also make sure that purchase agreement is contingent on you being able to do what you want on your property. So I wanted to take a few minutes to just describe what a septic system is for some of you who might not know and how it works. So all the water goes out a gravity sewer of the house and goes into a big concrete, usually concrete or plastic tank. We call it a septic tank. It might be 1,000 gallons or 2,000 gallons. The purpose of the septic tank is to physically hold the water for at least a day or two. This allows suspended solids to settle out. It also allows and promotes anaerobic digestion in that tank and helps to clean the wastewater a little bit. The septic tank has a baffle on the outlet that allows just the effluent to leave the tank, and that effluent, liquid effluent, goes out to some kind of an absorption field, whether it be trenches or a bed system or whatever you might have is popular in your area. You might also have a second tank, one after your septic tank, called a dosing tank or a pump tank. This is a tank with a pump in it with float controls, and so when it fills up, the pump turns on, pumps your water out to possibly a mound system or a trench system that might be higher in elevation. So this is the basic overview of what a septic system is. Of course, you need to have your septic tank pumped maybe every 3 to 5 years. I've got another video called when to know when to pump your septic tank, and I've got some animation there. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. I'll sell a core sampler that will show you when you need to pump your tank. Now, one of the key things in Indiana that's often required, especially in heavier, wetter soils, is a perimeter drain. Perimeter drains is a trench that goes all the way around the system. They're fairly deep. They have a perforated pipe in the bottom, and they're backfilled to the ground surface with either pea stone or gravel or sometimes medium sand. And the purpose of a perimeter drain is to not really accept the water from the absorption field, but it's to intercept water, groundwater that's moving onto the area of the absorption field. It's to actually lower the water table, the seasonal high water table, as defined by code, in the area of the soil absorption field. It's also going to catch, hopefully, surface water that's moving across the ground surface. It's going to then go down into that coarser material and down into this drain. Now, the problem with perimeter drains is we have to have a place for these to flow to. And so if we have a perimeter drain that's 5 feet deep, say, and in Indiana, these have to be 3 feet below the bottom of the trench. But we have to have some place for this to flow to. So hopefully, there's a large property, there's slope on the property, we can run this perimeter drain with a little bit of slope on it, 2/10 of a foot per 100 feet, which comes out to 2.4 inches per 100 feet, and run this pipe out and do what we call daylight outlet. So we're outletting it to the ground surface. We're going to put a rodent guard on it, and any water that the perimeter drain is moving is just going to outlet onto the ground surface. Other options are to run to a ditch, either a private ditch or a county-regulated ditch or a county-regulated drain. Your county surveyor might probably requires you get permission to connect your 4-inch perimeter drain tile outlet to a county open ditch, regular open ditch, or a county-regulated tile. And perimeter drains are the key, and we're going to get back to those in a minute. Okay, so now let's talk about the septic permit process in Indiana. If you have a property that you're interested in buying, I don't care if it's an existing house or if it's an empty parcel of land, whether it's in a subdivision or if it's a 40-acre parcel. One of the first things you can do when you're checking out this property is to check with the health department and see if they have records of that site being evaluated in the past. They might be very happy to share that information with you if they have it. It's very possible the site you're looking at, whether it's coming up for auction or whether it's being sold, it's possible that site someone tried to build on that site earlier, maybe sometime in the past, and they were turned down for some reason. So health department should be always your first, local health department should be your first check in when finding out about a property. So in Indiana, the first thing that you need to do is contact a certified soil scientist to have the site evaluated. Indiana requires the site be evaluated by a certified soil scientist. The body that licenses these and oversees these soil scientists is called the Indiana Registry of Soil Scientists. You can find their website. They have a list of all the soil scientists that are registered, certified in the state of Indiana, work in Indiana, and you can look at a list up and see who works in your area. Also, calling your local health department and saying, hey, I understand I need to have a soil scientist evaluate my property. Who are some soil scientists that work in your area? That might be an easier way to get some names and numbers of soil scientists. So the soil scientists will come out. They know soils, and they are the soils experts. They know about soil morphology, and so they can come out and look at your site. They're going to know if the good soils on your site are going to be at the top of the hill, on the side of the hill, or at the bottom of the hill. They're going to know where the most suitable soils are for your septic system. So a lot of times people are like, I want to put my house here, and the soil scientist says, well, that's where the best soils are for the septic system. So there's going to be some compromise in your process building a new house, and so keep that in mind. So contact soil scientists, get that soil boring evaluation started. They're going to give you a report, and that report can then go to the local health department, who's going to review the report. The health department will probably ask you how many bedrooms you're going to be proposing in your house. They're going to want to see probably a floor plan to make sure that the information you're giving them is correct. And then the health department is going to turn around and is going to issue requirements for a septic system for that 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom house. And then this is the part where I, as a septic system designer, often come in to do the design. So we would come on site, sometimes meet with the homeowner. We require the homeowner give us information about, of course, the soil report, the health department requirements, floor plan of the house, and usually a rough site plan. If they have a survey, we'd like that information too. And we will meet the homeowner on site sometimes, like I said, and we'll lay out the system by hand. We'll set an elevation benchmark. We'll pull tapes, get everything laid out perfectly, and get a design put together, and then get that to you, get that to the health department. The health department will approve that, and then they're going to issue a permit. Now, note that when you go to get a building permit in Indiana, most building departments communicate closely with the health department. And so you're not going to walk in and get a building permit if a septic system is required. The building department is going to probably have you first get your septic permit before they're going to allow you to get a building permit. Unless you're just getting a building permit for a barn first, they'll probably let you do that. But they will communicate with the health department otherwise. So, and then when it comes to installation, we have a professional group in Indiana called the Indiana On-Site Wastewater Professionals Association. This is an installer group mostly. There are other people, designers like myself, that have been a part of this group, and they do testing and training and certifying of septic system installers. And so if, of course, the best way to find an installer is to find someone or talk to someone, have someone give you a referral to a local installer that they've had good interactions with and good experience with. But you can go to the IOPA website. You can put in your zip code or your town or your county, and you can get a list of certified installers. So the other thing you can do is, just like with the soil scientists, you could call the health department and don't ask them for a referral, because they're most likely not going to do that. But if you say, hey, who are some of the excavators that are installing the most number of septic systems in the county, health departments will be happy to do that. And I bet they're not going to give you a name of somebody if they do terrible work. So that's the way to do it. So once the septic system is installed, and keep in mind that septic systems, many of them any septic system in heavy soils, I'll just say that, cannot be installed if the soils are wet. Wet soils are not suitable for installing septic systems because you can smear the sidewalls of the trenches, you can smear the trench bottoms, and you're basically smearing the soil shut. And so it's affecting the loading rate, the absorbability, if that's a word, of that absorption system. And so the health department won't let you do that. So there are tests that they can do, plasticity tests to check and make sure that the soils are suitable. But if you're in heavy soil and you want to put a system in between December and June, you're probably not going to do it. You're probably going to have to wait. So work with your builder and keep that in mind. Talk with your installer about when they think they can install the system, so you can work that into your construction schedule. And the last thing, after of course the system is installed, is your local health department will come out and they will do an inspection of the system. Usually they require that the system remains open while they, for them to come and look and probe and check pipe schedules, make sure things are leveled that need to be leveled, things that need to have slope, that kind of thing. So that's the process of the of septic system permitting in Indiana. So we already talked about the septic permit process, but let's jump back a little bit and talk about soils. Soils are, as they say, the soils are the system. And so soils are made up of sand, silt, and clay. And what the Indiana State Septic Code does is it looks at all the different textures of soil, which are the combination of the sand, silt, and clay. And it looks at the soil structure, and it gives a loading rate chart. So the health department uses that to size the system. They look at the estimated flow from the house, which is looking at 150 gallons per day estimated flow per bedroom, and they're dividing that into the loading rate to get the square footage. So the septic system absorption field has to be sized large enough to accept and absorb the water you're sending it from the house. So obviously the tighter, heavier soil you have, the more clay you have, for instance, equates to a much larger system because the loading rate is much less. When we're looking at soils, there are some limitations in soils. Where we are in Indiana, we don't have rock outcroppings or bedrock that comes into play, but a lot of parts of Indiana do. And so the bottom of the septic system, whether that's a mound system or whether that's a trench system, has to have a separation 24 or 36 inches above that bedrock. The same thing goes with compact till. Compact till is something we have up here in northern Indiana. A lot of our clay soils have these, and out in the farmer's field, you've got a compact till that's maybe 30, 40 inches deep. The septic system has to maintain a certain distance above that. The other thing that septic systems need a separation from is a seasonal high water table. So we have to maintain at least 20 inches with a mound system or 24 inches with other systems away from the seasonal high water table. So a seasonal high water table can be lowered by a perimeter drain, which we talked about earlier. And a perimeter drain, of course, has to have this outlet on the property. If you can't get an outlet for the perimeter drain on the property, you can go off property, but most county health departments will require that you have an easement for the use and maintenance of that tile to the point of discharge. So you have to have all the permissions to do that. Now, currently in Indiana, this is December 2022, if you have an existing tile on your property, they will allow you to connect to that and use that tile for your perimeter drain outlet. Now, the problem is most of these existing tiles, of course, were installed to lower the water table enough to farm that land. And so those tiles usually aren't deep enough for a perimeter drain. I should note that when we're talking about a seasonal high water table, that's kind of confusing language. And no, that does not mean if your soil scientist says that there's a seasonal high water table at 12 inches, that any time of the year you can dig down and you're going to find water pooled in that hole. No, in fact, you might be able to dig down 9, 10 feet in the middle of July and not hit any water at all. So the seasonal high water table is defined by code as modeling of chroma 2 or less. And what that basically means is that the drainage is so poor in that soil that for maybe just a few months out of the year or even less, you would have iron in that soil that would be reduced due to the anaerobic conditions, and it turns gray. So the soil scientists are looking for gray in most soils. They're looking for some slightly different features in sandy soils. They're also looking for free water too. But the seasonal high water table can go up and down as much as 3 feet in a lot of soils, depending on what time of the year it is. And again, the seasonal high water period is December through June here in Indiana. Let me say something about fill. So fill soils in Indiana are totally frowned upon and in fact are rejected outright. And the problem with fill is, as you remember, we talked about the loading rate chart in the code, and fill has no loading rate because it has no structure. So unless you have the perfect kind of sand, you're going to get rejected. So if you've got a site that used to be a landfill, or that somebody pushed and graded all the soil around, you're not going to be able to put a septic system on that where the soil was pushed around, where it was filled, where it was scraped, stockpiled, that kind of thing. You could have compaction. You have all these things that can affect the soil properties, specifically the soil structure. You're not going to change the texture by driving big trucks over it, but you are going to change the structure, and that's going to be a deal breaker. So be aware of that. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts in this video of property restrictions. Let's start with slope. In Indiana, you can put a trench system on up to 15% slope, and you can put an in-ground system, that is. You can put a mound system on up to 6% slope. Now, other states allow mound systems up to 20% or more slope, but that's not what Indiana allows. Indiana allows it only up to 6%. So slope can be a big problem. You might have a big lot, you might have 100 acres, but it might be all 20, 30% slope. This happens especially in southern Indiana, so look out. One of the things that's a problem with sites is the base flood elevation. That's known also as a 100-year flood plain or flood elevation. You need to look into this. No septic system can be installed below, or I should say the bottom of the septic system cannot be installed below the adjacent base flood elevation. And so, again, you might have a stream in the back, you might have a ditch, and there might be a floodplain associated with that. So you need to make sure you check. You can check with your county surveyor's office to see if there's a floodplain associated with the property you're looking at purchasing. You can also go online to the Indiana floodplain portal, and you can actually look at maps online for Indiana. The federal government also has, FEMA has flood maps that you can look at. So if you're outside of Indiana, you might want to look into that. That might be a good resource for you. Again, the bottom of the septic system has to be above that flood elevation. Wetlands. Wetlands are protected, at least they still are, December 2022. But even if they aren't protected, the soils aren't going to be very suitable. These hydric soils have a very high water table. They also will often have mucky soils that really have no loading rate and are not on the loading rate chart, or they have a 0 on the loading rate chart. You get muck and marl. These are not suitable soils for septic systems. Also, wetlands are always going to be very low in the landscape. And so even if you find suitable soils maybe near a wetland, they're going to need to be drained with a perimeter drain or an upslope interceptor drain, and you're not going to be able to find an outlet for it, most likely. We talked a little bit about regulated drains and ditches. The county surveyor in your county has jurisdiction over these. These drains have a 75-foot easement associated with them. From an open ditch, this is going to be 75 feet from the top of the bank back. That is a restricted, the activities that happen in that area are restricted. The county surveyor needs to be able to, or has the right to, and will insist they have the ability to clean out that ditch if they need to. You can get permission usually to encroach on that 75 feet to build your septic system or build your house with the county surveyor's permission. They tend to let you have that as long as there's other access to the ditch. If there's only access to one side of the ditch, they're going to be pretty strict on that 75-foot setback. So that's something else to check into and have that conversation with your county surveyor, again, before you purchase the property. County regulated tile, usually they're big tiles, usually they're at least 8-inch, sometimes they're as big as 24-inch diameter. That 75-foot easement is from the center of that tile out. And again, that's a restricted area. You need to get permission to do anything inside of. Other kinds of easements will also restrict what you can do on the property. If you look out across a farm field, you might not see it, but there might be a pipeline running through there, a gas pipeline. You might have a fiber optics line running through there, and these might have very large easements associated with them. And so you got to find out if these exist and get that information and fully understand what your rights are and what the restrictions are. Also in subdivisions or platted lots, there might be non-access easements, just so you know, up along the road. There might be electrical easements and other things across the sides or across the back. There might be drainage easements. But the non-access easement is, I see usually there to restrict where somebody can put their driveway, where they can connect to that road. So if you're on a hill and the planning department or zoning might only approve a driveway to certain locations, your local zoning laws might also require certain setbacks. You need to find out what those are, and don't make any assumptions on where you want to put your house. You might be restricted to the back of the property, for instance. You might not be able to build in the back 20% of that, the depth of that lot, so get that checked out. Of course, city water and sewer might be available. It's possible you might have availability of city water, but not city sewer, or vice versa. I've seen both circumstances. Make sure that you know what your options are. Now, also with a well, I've seen places where you can't drill a well and get water. There are weird, I'm not a geologist, but I know that there are strange geologic conditions where you can't get a well. So again, if you're looking to purchase a property, do your homework, talk to a local well driller, tell them where you're looking to build, and find out what they think about if they can drill a well there and if it can have a successful well that gets you water. You might also want to talk to local neighbors, of course, to see what they say, if they had luck with their well. Regarding separation in septic systems have to be at least, residential septic systems have to be at least 50 feet from wells, and they have to be at least 100 feet from commercial wells, and 200 feet from public water supplies. One of the things we get into often is people will find a subdivision they love and their houses, all these houses are built, but there's one lot it's not built on. And what people do is when we're buying property, we think, oh, this is a great property, and you want to have positive thoughts. You want to feel encouraged about this. So you tell yourself, all these other lots were built on, surely I can build on that lot. But instead what you should think is, oh, that's the only lot that hasn't been built on. There must be something wrong with that lot. And this is that case where the health department, if that's the case, the health department is likely to have some really good information for you about that lot. But don't make assumptions that you can build on a lot because it's the only lot that hasn't been built on. The other thing is, don't assume that a lot can be built on or have a septic system built on if it has remnants of an old house on it. Just because somebody was allowed to build on it in the 20s or 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it does not mean that the soil is suitable for a septic system. You need to get the soils checked out. Our current state code went into effect around 1990. It's been changed a lot, but prior to 1990, there were very little regulations about septic systems. And so you need to do your homework and not on that lot and not make any assumptions that the lot is buildable because there's a house on it. So one of the main reasons I wanted to do this video is auctions. I cannot tell you the horror story of people buying property at auctions. People get all excited, they start bidding with other people, and they buy it at the auction. What I understand about auctions is a lot of times sales are final. They want a clean sale, no strings attached. They want it final. And so if a property is being sold at auction, maybe you should think ahead of time, well, maybe they're selling it because there are issues, and this would be a good way to get rid of a lot, or many lots, or an entire farm, if it's complicated for septic systems on these lots. And so a lot of times people will buy 3 or 5 acre lot, and again, what we have is that problem with there's no outlet for a perimeter drain. Sometimes they'll run a tile all the way across the back of all these lots, and there is an outlet. But again, you need to ask, you need to have the soil evaluated. Go ahead and spend the money and spend the $500 or $700. Have the soils evaluated before the auction, so you know you have the health department requirements, and you know what kind of system can go in. You can know if there's a perimeter drain, is there an outlet for that perimeter drain at the depth it needs to be. So let's talk about existing septic systems. If you're buying an existing house, it's going to have an existing septic system. Many counties, health departments, and many lending agencies now require that a septic inspection is done. That would probably be done by a certified inspector from an association like our IOPA, our Indiana On-Site Wastewater Professionals Association. They'll come out, they will inspect the tank, they'll inspect the field system, and give you a report on how it appears to be functioning. This is super important to understand. A lot of people, when they're buying a house, they assume that it's going to have a working system and it's going to work fine. Even if the system passes inspection, it's very possible that system's not going to last you, and you might have to put, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 into that system for a new septic system. But these existing systems, if the house has been empty and the system has been sitting for a couple of years, even if that system was failing when those people moved out, it's going to probably work for maybe a year before it starts failing again. Rest is really good for septic systems. It allows that system to kind of dry out and allows it to work maybe for another year before it fails again. So get the inspection done. You might also want to get soil borings done by a certified soil scientist to know what kind of system you would need to install if that septic system fails on that house you just bought. So back to the purchase agreements. Again, make sure that your purchase agreement is contingent on you being able to get the permits that you need for whatever you want to do on that property. And a lot of properties aren't suitable for septic systems for a lot of the reasons we've talked about in this video. And you want to make sure that you can get your money back or have some legal leverage to do so if for some reason you can't get a system installed. This kind of leads us into design. I've been a septic system designer for 27 years now. We do a lot of work with people that are looking at properties. Once they have the requirements from the health department, we can look and see if a perimeter drain is required, if a perimeter drain outlet exists on the site. And a lot of times we really struggle to find a perimeter drain outlet. But if it's required, you have to have one. So we can investigate that for you before you purchase the lot. So we lay out the system on site, we gather all the information and put the design together. So I hope this video has been helpful to you. I tried to cover a lot of things. There are a lot of the things I probably didn't cover, but I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. And hopefully you've at least learned to be cautious about buying property to build a new home on, or buying a property with an existing home that has a septic system. So, okay, thanks for watching and take care.